Well, if you were to set out to create a country in which you would have one man, one vote, free speech guaranteed to everybody, and then you'd have candidacies in which one side would be able to spend $22 million and the other side $500,000, you'd realize that that kind of democracy was a hoax. Nobody would even argue about it. Yet those instances in our society have become frequent, and the fact that they don't always occur doesn't mean that they're right when they do occur. What we're proposing tonight is that there be a way in which everybody, even if they're not born rich, have a fair chance to be elected to public office. Today in the United States, 90% of the political contributions come from 1% of the population. And what we hope we can do is to amend the law so that there will be a guarantee that people will have access to funds so they can run if they have enough support to merit it. And then to put a limit on how much any one individual can give so nobody can purchase through wealth an undue share in the decision-making process. To start the testimony for the evening, I call Senator Biden of Delaware.
Senator Biden, welcome to the Advocates.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Senator Biden, it's nice to have you here. As the youngest member of the Senate, the one, therefore, who may expect the longest career there, I wonder if you'd say to us, since it's clear that you're not corrupt and you got elected, why should people think that the system produces corrupt results when there you are?
Well, I'm not sure you should assume I'm not corrupt, but thank you for that, though. The system does produce corruption, and I think implicit in the system is corruption, when in fact, whether or not you can run for public office, and it costs a great deal of money to run for the United States Senate, even from a small state like Delaware, you have to go to those people who have money, and they always want something.
Well, I wonder whether you would feel that there's some virtue in forcing candidates to go out and try to raise money. I've heard people, probably people who didn't run for office, say that it's uplifting to go out and try to get money. Do you think that there's something unuplifting about putting a limit to how much you can ask one man to give you?
I think it's the most degrading experience in the world to have to go out and ask for money, because you know that unless you accidentally agree with the position taken by the person or group that has the money, that you run the risk of deciding whether or not you're going to prostitute yourself to give the answer you know they want to hear in order to get funded to run for that office. And it's coincidental in many instances when in fact you happen to agree with where they are. And you run the risk, by the way, of rationalizing, of saying, well, if I compromise on this one, give them one, I get 90% of what I want, and I don't have to give in too much.
So you feel it's a difficult temptation not only for the candidate, not only for the people who give the money, but for the people trying to raise it.
Well, you know, we were told that we politicians, as the young kids say, rip off the American public. I think the American public, in a way, rips off we politicians by forcing us to run the way they do. To raise $300,000 is no mean feat. And unless you happen to be some sort of anomaly, like myself, being a 29-year-old candidate and can attract some attention beyond your own state, it's very difficult to raise that money from a large group of people.
Well, now, some people who agree with the problem, or our definition of the problem, turn around and say, if you just had full disclosure, that would solve it. Do you think that would have a major effect on the problems you're describing?
I think full disclosure is essential. We have that now, allegedly. But that's not going to get to the question of how you have to raise the money and the influence of those who come forward with the money, whether they be a labor union or a corporate executive.
Well, if we put a limit on what individuals can give, and if we have public assistance for candidates, do you think that would work, as some have suggested, to make incumbency even more powerful, that there'd be no way then that challengers could succeed?
No, I don't, but I do think you run the risk in limiting the amount that can be spent of continuing the tyranny of the incumbent. For example, I'm on this show for one reason. I'm an incumbent United States Senator. Were this an election year, this would be allegedly votes for me back home. A challenger of mine would have to pay a great deal of money to get this kind of TV time. We have a lot going for us when we're incumbents, and we use it.
Well, but this process that we're suggesting tonight, in your view, would not make it more difficult for people to challenge incumbents?
Absolutely not. As long as you have a bill like the Anderson bill, which doesn't limit the amount that can be spent, but limits the amount that an individual can contribute. And that way you further broaden the process, further broaden the participation. Because why does a guy want to give $50 when he knows Clement Stone is giving $7 million? What influence is his $50 going to have?
Now, you might say, what makes it clear that a person is more effective at raising funds if he happens to know one man who can give him $1 million while someone else may know 100 who can give 100 each? That problem of access to money, rich people tend to know rich people. Would you say that's a fair statement?
I think that's correct. And those who aren't rich tend to move towards people who have ideas that can raise a lot of money.
And in the present atmosphere, would you say that with Watergate that we're reacting hysterically to this problem, or?
Make this very brief.
I don't think so at all. I think this is the single most important issue that can be resolved by this Congress.
All right, let's
clean up the process.
let's go to Mr. Bordeaux. I think he's eager to ask you some questions.
Senator, I noticed you said that it was degrading to go out and raise money. Does this mean that you are not in favor of the Anderson bill, which does permit contributions up to $1,000?
No, it doesn't. I think it's degrading to have to go out and know that that is your only source of money when the man you're talking to, for example, knows that in fact he's the only means by which you can even begin to run for office.
But are you in favor of the Anderson bill?
Yes, I am in favor of the Anderson bill.
All right. Now let me ask you this question. The Anderson bill provides a $1,000 limitation on contributions. Are you saying that going out and asking for $1,500 is degrading?
No, I think you missed the point, or else I haven't made the point properly. If, in fact, you know that the only way you can raise any money to get to run for public office is to go to vested interest groups, then, in fact, you're put in the position that you have to begin to wonder whether or not you prostitute the ideas that you have about government in order to get the money to begin to run.
Of course, you've had recent experience with this, having been elected in 1972.
That's correct.
And I believe you just said that your campaign cost some $300,000.
$276,000.
All right, so, and you raised that money by public contributions, did you not?
That's correct.
And you raised that money in a race against an incumbent, did you not?
That's correct.
Yes. And, Senator, I'm sure that you would agree that your service in the Senate up to this point has not reflected any particular concern for the larger contributors.
Well, the fortunate thing is I didn't have many larger contributors, and the only reason, see, I went to the big guys for the money. I was ready to prostitute myself in the manner in which I talk about it, but what happened was they said, come back when you're 40, son, and so I had to go out. So I had to go to a number of small contributors.
Well, I think we're all grateful, Senator. You didn't take no for an answer. Now, in this Anderson bill, there's a provision for the federal government to match dollar for dollar contributions from small contributions up to $100. Is that correct?
I believe so.
So that means that federal tax monies are going to be used in political campaigns in Delaware or Illinois or Mississippi or wherever. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, Senator, isn't it the history of this country that federal control follows federal money? And a recent example, didn't the president decide it was expedient to have a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit on all the highways? And didn't he get to Congress to pass a bill that says to a state you get no more federal money unless you pass a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit?
Can't blame it all on the president, but yes, he did.
Well, but the fact is that in any instance where federal money goes into any given area, there is federal control as to how that money is going to be spent.
There's federal control right now, sir, in exactly how the money can be spent, what manner in which it can be raised. The only question is whether or not there will be taxpayers' money involved directly.
Who is going to exercise the control over the spending of this taxpayers' money?
The control will be exercised by, as you point out, the federal government in terms of whether or not the means of distribution, in terms of how it can be spent, whether or not you can buy a balloon or a billboard with that money. There is no control in this legislation or any that I'm aware of.
That is correct, but doesn't history tell us that ultimately there will be that control?
Well, that sort of smacks of the argument always heard about civil rights. You know, once we get into that field, the foot in the door argument that you're making applies to just about every means of every particular piece of legislation we've passed.
Well, now, Senator, I haven't been in many political campaigns, but the few I have been in, there's always somebody that comes up with what I call a damn fool idea. Now,
I've had a few.
Have you got to have any protection in these bills against the damn fool factor?
No, I think that's human nature. There are an awful lot of damn fools in the Congress and the Senate and those who want to get there, but there's no way you can legislate against that.
Right, but you think in the long run that the American people are going to put up with their money being squandered on all sorts of wild political notions?
The question is, how long is the American public going to put up with a small group of men and organizations determining the political process by deciding who can run and who can't run?
But Senator, aren't you a living example?
I am an anachronism. I'm a 29-year-old oddball. The only reason I was able to raise the money is I was able to have a national constituency to run for office. Because I was 29, I'm like the token black or the token woman. I was the token young person.
We're talking about this national constituency. Some of the money that
That's not an announcement for office, by the way.
All right, I'm going to have to interrupt here. Let's go back to Mr. Lowenstein for a question.
I was just wondering, Mr. Bordeaux seems worried about that $1,000 limit. If Mr. Bordeaux would agree to support our principle, would you agree to go to a $1,500 limit?
I'd agree to go to a $3,000 limit, which is a bill that I, in fact, co-sponsored. When I said I'd support Congressman Anderson's bill, I do. It's better than what we have now. I'd like to see some slight amendments to it, but I think the principle has to be adopted.
All right, let's come back to you, Mr. Bordeaux.
Senator, aren't there some First Amendment problems in telling somebody that you can't give but $1,000 to a campaign?
Quite frankly, I think there are, but we've already in the Federal Corrupt Practices Act broached that question, and if in fact we agree that it's legal to do what we're doing now and that is not violate the First Amendment, it seems to me this is a natural transition, and if we haven't violated them now, I don't think we're violating them with this legislation.
Well, let's see if I understand you. As an example of the First Amendment question, if, let's say, I give $1,000 to a candidate of my choice, I take it I'm limited under this bill from giving any more. Is that right?
That would be correct.
And if something happened during the campaign that I wanted to speak out on and spend some money to put a newspaper ad in, I couldn't do that. Isn't that right?
That is correct.
And I take it that's what you mean, isn't it, by the restraint?
Absolutely.
There are similar restraints that exist now, though, in terms of how we can spend our money. For example, we say now you can only spend up to a certain percentage on 10% per capita on media, 6% of that on television. I mean, we've already restricted it in that regard.
But there are no statutory restraints on the amount of giving by an individual at this time, are there?
No, there are not, but I fail to see the distinction between the amount and the means. But there may be.
Well, Senator Budden, I want to thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.